You're listening to the 90 Days Later podcast with Anna Charles, episode 132. Welcome to the 90 Days Later podcast, where I show you how life with less alcohol is more fun than you think. I work with high achievers who struggle to drink a glass of wine without it turning into 2 bottles. I'm the one they call when they want to take it or leave it. So if you want to change your relationship with alcohol that doesn't involve counting days sober, you're in the right place. Hi everybody, and welcome back to the podcast. I think I mentioned it last week, but it's worth a re-mention. Do you have your free Crush the Cravings guide? It's a little guide I've put together, and it contains 3 things to do when you feel like you can't say no. So it's super handy. Super handy. You can get yours at 90dayslater.co/3 things. That is 3 things or one word. Go get yours. It's free. Great. Okay, let's get on with today's show, which is about being resourceful. Now, one of the things I hear again and again and again when people first come to me when they're drinking too much is that this is like the one thing in their lives they haven't got a handle on. And they don't understand it, right? They don't understand why. And I completely empathize with this. This was me for so many years. It is so frustrating and so confusing. You know you are resourceful. I mean, you have to have been resourceful to achieve what you have in life. And what's more, you probably pride yourself on being resourceful, right? You don't like giving up. You don't like asking for help, especially on this topic. In fact, it is very common for people to feel so guilty and ashamed about this topic that you'd really rather not talk about it. Besides, you're great at making things happen. You always seem to figure it out, right? Whichever situation you're in, at work or at home. Well, most of the time, except when you don't. Except when you don't have the answers you're looking for, and then you then pour hours into searching for it when you could have just asked someone for help. Someone like me, in fact. Yeah? And except for when you insist on DIYing it because that's what worked before, right? You're resourceful, you figure it out. Even though this time, given that the topic is drinking and you haven't been able to figure it out for all these years, you are patently making your life harder than it has to be. And meanwhile, you're drinking too much with no firm solution in sight. And because you feel bad about this, you end up drinking more to feel better, right? That's how we get stuck in that loop. Because you see, there is a downside to resourcefulness, and it doesn't get talked about a lot. But you need to know about it, because if you are a resourceful person, if you're a go-getting type A, this is what makes learning how to drink less take twice as long. Or what can make learning how to drink less twice as long. And it's this, the knowledge that you can do stuff and that you can figure it out, right? That is what makes learning to ask for help take twice as long, and all the time you sink into trying to figure out the solution on your own, well, it's going to give you a rather sinking feeling, especially as you have not yet got over the finish line, because you still don't have the answers to the problem of drinking in moderation, because you've still not been taught how to solve it, which is why you've always struggled with the drinking and with the understanding of why you drink so much and everything that goes with it, right? All the stuff like caring too much about what other people think, even though you know that makes no sense, with all the not making yourself a priority during the day, with all the deciding you're going to be strong, only to have a nightmare of a day and to crumble when you get home and make a beeline for the wine in the fridge as usual. Now listen, you are going to keep struggling as long as you don't have the answer, right? As long as you'll keep going it alone, you aren't going to stumble into solving these problems. I know that because I had to take myself out of all the stuff I was doing in order to dedicate time to figure out how to do this. So you aren't going to just stumble upon a solution So the problem is going to go unsolved. You're going to stay stuck. And mainly because solving these problems requires a different type of resourcefulness. It requires a different view on it, I think. Now, I often say that if you have lots of willpower, that can really get in the way when learning how to drink less. Why? Because you're going to misunderstand, or you will be more likely to misunderstand and misinterpret what it means to allow an urge or a craving without fighting it. Why? Because, resisting and fighting and being strong is something you have in bucket loads. It's kind of like your secret weapon you're going to use really actively and really naturally when facing any kind of challenge, right? You're not going to be bowed by the challenge. You're going to go at it. But the thing is that with changing relationship with alcohol, it isn't about this, because it's about unwinding the habit at source, right? It's not just about tackling the action of drinking. And what's going to happen is if you do use willpower to tackle the cravings, you are going to have some success. In fact, you might have quite a lot of success. And for sure, in the short term, you will, right, with cravings. But then you're going to get confused. There will come a time when you're still going to find yourself popping a cork, when you're going to find yourself saying, well, what harm will one more do? Even when you know that's not what you want, right? You'll find yourself back in the habit. It's kind of like you've been parachuted back into it from nowhere. And that's what can happen when we use willpower to change. Now, listen, when it comes to doing this DIY, I'm not saying that you won't have success with that approach. I mean, I know many people get huge amounts of value from my podcast, and thank you to everybody who writes to tell me that. It does mean a lot to me. And I know people get so huge of value from my podcast, and I'm happy. I'm really happy for that. I'm thrilled that you're listening to this now. In fact, I'm relieved, because if the thousands of people who listen to this podcast all wanted to work with me one-on-one, it would take me years to get around to everyone, and that would not be a good solution. And by the way, it is part of my mission to stop all the shame and the dread around alcohol, right? And stop all the nonsense that you have to go sober if you have any kind of problem with drinking. I mean, I really want to rewrite how we view alcohol in society. Is kind of like what I have really my objective, right? So that's all good. But if you are ordinarily resourceful and this DIY approach hasn't been working for you, and if you feel bad about that, here's a different way to consider the situation, while still allowing you to maintain your badge of honor about being a resourceful person. So, for example, let's say you decided you want to replumb the kitchen sink. It has been leaking, the tap's been leaking, it's been really annoying, and you think you should be able to do this. You want to do it, you're interested in doing it, and you're actually tackling it, you're doing the action, but it's not working. So what would happen if none of the YouTube videos would work, if asking your husband or a neighbor or a friend hasn't worked, and you still have the leaky tap, the non-functioning kitchen sink? What would you do? Well, you would get help from someone who has the skills to do it, or you'd work with someone who knows how to teach the skills to you, right? And then guess what? Guess what would happen then? You would get on with your life. You would have the skills for the future, for sure, if there was another plumbing job required, or at least you wouldn't be struggling with the plumbing problem in the present, right? You wouldn't be having to avoid using that sink, use the one in the bathroom because the kitchen one has the problematic tap. You also wouldn't be feeling bad that you needed help and you had to ask for help to get the sink fixed. You wouldn't be living with the problem of the sink that needed plumbing in, and you wouldn't be saying you get around to it someday. You wouldn't be occasionally scrolling YouTube channels to find a better way of fixing the tap before leaving it for something more urgent, right? You wouldn't ignore the problem. Struggling with overdrinking is a bit like living with an unplumbed in leaky kitchen sink, in that it is a pain. It is something you have to continually work around, resent, dabble at, and then still don't get anywhere, and still the problem is there. And kind of the problem grows and grows and grows because the solution is feeling even more out of sight. Now, why did I use an example of plumbing? Well, because learning to drink in moderation is like any other skill. If you follow my process, you're going to get the knowledge and you're going to get your desired result around alcohol. Just because you drink too much, it doesn't mean anything about your character. And just because you ask for help doesn't mean you aren't resourceful. What it means is you're going to learn how to do it, then you're going to get on with your life. Boom. Right? Like you do with so many other things. In fact, why not write a list right now? This would be some great homework. Write a list right now of all the things you get help with already, or you have got help with in the past, or even things you're getting help with today. Things you wouldn't imagine DIYing your way through. Right? Think of something. You could even think of something right now in your head, something that you got help with. You wouldn't even have entertained the idea of DIYing it yourself, doing it yourself, learning it yourself. Then ask, why did you take that approach? Right? Do you feel bad about your decision to get help? Or did you think it was the smartest way forward? Why? And then even if it did cost you money, and if it did cost you time, right, you had to take time out to learn the thing, was that still the best decision for you at that time? Even if perhaps you thought you should have been able to figure it out and you didn't, and even if you think, oh, I just cracked, Anna, and I just had to ask for help. Was that the right decision at the time? Did it end up saving you time? What made you happy with those decisions? How did you feel when you made those decisions? And the reason I ask all these questions, want to have you pose at least a selection of these to yourself and your resourcefulness and how you ask for help, is that behind every action there is a thought and a feeling. And the same applies to every decision, right? Whether we like a decision or not, it comes down to what we're thinking and feeling about it. And understanding what works for you when it comes to taking decisions to help yourself, that is going to bolster your resourcefulness way beyond anything you can imagine. For instance, as a result of looking at it like this, you could decide you're going to just drop your thoughts about being upset that you can't sort this drinking thing out for yourself, right? You're just going to ditch those thoughts. They're not serving you. You could see that being resourceful is you putting yourself first and actually getting the help you want wherever you may find it. And let me ask you this, how could seeking help, opening up and getting help for this, how could you view that as an addition to your tool belt of things that make you resourceful? How could accepting the help you want, how could that be getting you further, faster? Because there is being hyper-resourceful, which is what you probably are right now, and then there is being resourced. Think of the distinction. It is powerful. How does being resourceful lead to a situation where you find the resources you need to solve the problem, right? How can you be resourceful at getting resourced? And then truly think of all the time you are going to save. You are mapping the direct route to the goal you want. Now listen, doing this on your own, it's out there. It's an option. Struggling on your own is optional. And if that's you, if you are struggling, stop trying to DIY your personal development, because being resourceful sometimes means outsourcing help. And I really can tell you this from the bottom of my heart, moving on from this problem and living your life without all the will I, won't I negotiation over the wine is within your grasp. This is what I teach. Now listen, if you're nodding along, if you love my podcast, if you're getting help, you have been DIYing yourself so far, you're getting results and you're making changes, I want you to imagine what you would learn and how your life would change by working with me one-on-one, right? The fast lane. If my podcasts are the ingredients for a great meal, working with me is the recipe for being able to cook that delicious meal consistently for the rest of your life. Yum. If you want this, if you want directly to talk with me, go to 90dayslater.co and click on the book a call button at the top of the page and you'll get a discovery call with me. That initial call is free. We chat about where you are, where you want to be, what hasn't worked, and I will map out the exact steps to get you to your desired destination. Okay, that's everything for this week, my resourceful friends, and I will see you next time.